Welcome back. Larry Muhammad with Unlocking Genius Institute. And I'm here with our good friend Phil Jackson in this section of the online learning program, Building Intellectual Equity. And I felt that if we deal with the issue of building intellectual equity, one of the people that we definitely need to speak with and have as a part of our program in this learning experience is Phil Jackson. So I want to thank you and welcome you, for joining us.
Oh, absolutely. This is a rare pleasure to actually be able to talk about this aspect of education. It's something that I work on all the time.
Right.
But unfortunately, in my community, in our community, our leadership, even our educational leadership, is not focusing on building intellectual equity, intellectual capacity, all the things that I believe drive communities forward, drive cities and drive countries forward.
Right.
So this is great. I appreciate you doing this.
Yes, sir. Thank you. And before I ask Phil to address a couple of the main points that we want to focus on, I wanted to say that many of you know Phil Jackson from Black Star Project and their work with the Million Father March, which is taking place in now over 200 cities. 600 cities around the world.
Yes, sir.
And also the mentoring programs. So whatever advice and recommendation that Phil lays before us, we want to make sure we plug you and your community and family into what he's doing throughout the country and throughout the world. And of course, I first met Phil when he was, I think, Chief of Staff at Chicago Public Schools.
Yes, sir.
Under Paul Vallis. And so he's been doing great work for a long time. So getting right into it, what are the first steps that we as educators, as parents, as community leaders and stakeholders, what are the first steps that we need to take in working with the homes, the schools, the churches, mosques, the community, and community leaders? What are those first steps in building this intellectual capital? And how can we put it into action and implementation?
Well, one of the first steps that we shouldn't take, and this is something that most parents, most educators try and do, they focus first and sometimes only on the child. And they say that if I work with just this child and I'll put him or her through their paces, I'll make sure that they're exposed to as many things as possible, that I get them as much information as possible, then I will successfully create a young person who has this intellectual equity, intellectual desire, et cetera, et cetera. And from what I have seen, that's not the way to do it.
Okay.
Simply to focus on your child or on children first. You've got to focus on the context, the entire context that your child is going to be in. That means everything from the physical environment, the nutritional environment, what they eat, his or her peers, friends. Everything is relevant when it comes to building this intellectual equity. And in fact, it's almost a generational thing. It's how you have built your intellectual capacities, your intellectual equity, and then you pass that on. Your children inherit that from you. And so this is absolutely a case of don't do, what I say, do what I do. And we've got to teach our adults that this is not about making our children smart. It's about making us smart, making our community smart, making our culture smart. And in doing so, at Black Star, we've looked at other cultures. And we consider education to be war. It's war at this point. You're in a war for resources. You're in a war for food. You're in a war for medical attention. It's that serious.
Right.
That if you don't get a good education, you're going to lose that war. And you possibly might lose your life because you lose the educational war. So we come at this question of intellectual equity as a serious question that our community, that the black community, we just haven't given it enough attention and the right kind of attention that it deserves for the importance that it has in terms of the trajectory of our future as a people.
Right. Okay. You know, that's a good point you bring up. I was talking with Michael Adrian Howard, who established and created Ivy League tutoring here in Chicago. And he's a member of the Mensa, the Genius Society, for those who are not aware of Mensa. But his goal, since he graduated from Yale University, has been to tutor black children and push them into the top 1% of academic performers in the country. And in one case, he was telling me, and we're going to interview him for this program and talk with him, but one case he told me he was tutoring a child, a second grade girl, years ago, and then he ended up tutoring the mother. But as a result of working with the two of them, as the little girl went up in academic performance, the mother went up. And the mother had dropped out of college because she hadn't done well, but she ended up going back to college and actually became a master's, doctoral student, and a college professor herself. So this is a case study, and I thought about that when you talked about the capacity that we have to have as parents and as adults in the community, and the impact that that has on the children. And I know at Black Star you all have the Parent University. How is that playing a part in this, and what can parents, you know, that's at home and working on this lesson and activity, how can they implement some of those practices that you're doing in the Parent University or the Saturday University?
Well, first of all, the work of Ivy League tutoring is legendary on the south side of Chicago.
Right.
And it would be great if they could do more on the west side of Chicago, north side, and they get out in the south suburbs. But it's legendary. It's great work, and I strongly support that brother and his goal. Now, what I have found is that there's really no difference between black children, Chinese children, Latino children, Indian children, even though this thing called the racial academic achievement gap has got black children at the absolute rock bottom of the American education system, with black boys being basically the bedrock. Black boys are there's no one lower than black boys in the American education system.
Right.
But what I have found is that really there is no racial academic achievement gap. Now, a lot of educators would argue that point. They go, have I seen the data from NAEP? Have I seen the latest ISAT scores, Prairie State scores, whatever? Okay, I have found that there really is no racial academic achievement gap. Now, there are gaps, but the gaps are in how we as a community embrace learning, embrace education, how we as a community create lifelong learners who are able to learn from us and then to continue learning without us. Now that's where the gaps are. And unfortunately, we are not addressing the gaps. And so what we do, and I'm talking about black people, we call it a racial academic achievement gap. And so we literally put our children down. We put our children at the bottom. We sacrifice our children to this American education system. And then, and this is kind of crazy, we expect young white women to ride into our communities and save us. So that's a part of it. Now, on what you said, and what you said is just so profound and so true about when the brother was tutoring the child and then he started tutoring the mother. The best way to impact academic achievement of children is to connect it with the academic achievement of parents. And so when children go into a household and you tell them, do well in school, but they see you watching soap operas or they see you watching Jerry Springer, children are smart. They go, wait a minute, you don't tell me to do well in school and then you just blow it off. And so when children see that their parents are actually invested in their own education, not the child's education, but when they're invested in their education, children learn faster, learn more, learn better, do better in school, and it's almost like a tailwind. The higher the parents go, the higher the children follow. We have found, and this especially is so with female parents. And I don't know all the reasons why. It could be the more natural maternal bonds. I don't know all the reasons why, but it doesn't follow necessarily with male parents. But with female parents, one of the purest indicators of academic success for children is how well will the mother do. So I absolutely agree with that, and you're right. You're right about things like the parent university. So if you really want to improve children's academic performance, you've got to improve parents, not only their academic performance, their academic IQs or intelligence quotients, their academic aggressiveness. You've got to do that in the parents. And unfortunately, and I've said that too many times, unfortunately, but black parents believe, and we bought the okey doke, and this was from about 1960 up to 1980, maybe 1990. The okey doke was, all we have to do is send our children to these integrated schools. The worst decision that we could possibly make as a community is to think, first of all, and you might know that, I'm sure you know this, schools are more segregated today in 2015 than they were in 1955, or actually 1953, which was a year before Brown versus Topeka Board of Education. So that was a shell game, this integration. So there really was no integration. And those of us who live in Chicago know that most schools where black children attend are 85, 90, 95, almost 100% African American. So there really was no integration, and there is no integration at this point. Right. But when we believe that simply that integration was going to cause our children to learn more, that's when you will almost see this parabolic descent of the confidence of our children, of the attitudes of our children, of the academic performance of our children. I mean, it's down. If I can give you just one example. Mm-hmm. Here in the city of Chicago, 9% of black boys in the 8th grade read at or above level. 9%, and this is from the National Assessment of Educational Progress. Now, 9%. Now, by the way, Chicago is doing better than a lot of cities. I think Detroit is 6%, Washington, D.C. is 6%, Milwaukee is 3%, Cleveland is 3%. Now, I'm talking about 3 out of 100 of their boys read at a proficient level in Cleveland and Milwaukee. 3 out of 100. And so my point to that is, possibly, we should close down the schools. Possibly, rather than the schools generating literacy, possibly they're generating a kind of illiteracy. And the way to stop this illiteracy is actually to shut them down. And I'm not saying, believe me, I am not against education. I am for education, which is why I'm talking about closing down the schools and reinventing something that's going to work. If only 9% of black boys are reading proficiently in Chicago, I could do better than that out of a pool room. out of a pool hall, barbershop. I can do out of a juke joint. You know,
Right.
if I had a street gang, a drug gang, I can do better than 9% of the boys reading proficiently. So, so we have work to do, but you see, we as a community, we have given our ability, our God-given, not just right, an inalienable right. We've given that away. We've told other people, you educate our children. You are in charge of whatever goes into their minds, their hearts, and their spirits. We gave it away. They didn't even have to take it from us. We just gave it to them. And this is something that we have to take back.
Well, no, that's excellent. That's an excellent point. And, you know, that's something that we're going to highlight in this process throughout the online learning because when you talk about this era from the 60s through the 80s, and of course in the 60s when we had the authorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act and this integration of schools. So now your thought, which ties into what we've been talking about with the new educational paradigm and needing a new paradigm, when you say that we need to close down the schools, you know, if we look at the data, if you look at it from a business perspective, who could argue that? Because the amount of money that's been spent, not only on schooling,
But on failing schools.
but on failing schools since the 60s, but also the amount of money as a part of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which, you know, was reauthorized with No Child Left Behind, but the amount of money that's been spent on additional funding on top of the schooling for remedial work in reading, particularly. So what we'd like to do in this process is look at this data, look at the research, and then start looking at ways where we can take the idea of the parent university, the Saturday university, the home schools that many are doing, the church-sponsored schools, mosque-sponsored schools, and take the necessary action steps and implementation steps to coordinate this effort and start to take back control of the education of our children so that we can start to bring about a change in this process, because everyone agrees and knows that it's a crisis. And as we've talked about before, now is the point where, starting today, we have to move forward. Looking back in 2014 with the Mike Brown issue and crisis and the Eric Garner, and one of the things that I noticed with the Eric Garner, he was out hustling and selling loose cigarettes. And the first thing I thought about as we go into 2015 and as we're doing this learning process that we're doing here with building intellectual equity, one of the main reasons we have to take over the education of our community is because our ability to have a good quality of life and our ability to control our future is at stake. You know, Eric Garner was trying to survive. And so what we're talking about from an educational perspective has a direct impact on the economic future and the economic stability of our community. So in closing this module and this component, what would you recommend to those who are out on the front line dealing with this issue, whether it's in the home or whether it's in the community, and some of the steps to take?
Well, at Black Star, our motto is, those who control the education of the children control the future of that race. And right now, black people do not control the education of our children. Therefore, we do not control the future of our race. And there is nothing more important than our future as a race. For us, there's nothing more important, and we have no control. We have very little control, maybe no control over that. That's number one. Number two, you brought up dollars. education by itself, early childhood, preschool, private school, public school, charter school, college. Education in the United States of America is a $1 trillion business. Straight up business. Now, and a lot of people like to say, well, it's nice to try and educate the children. That's not how business works. And so with education being a $1 trillion business, then the question has to come, well, who's benefiting from the $1 trillion business? And the answer is not the children, not the black children that are literally being ground up like meat by that education system in that business. So that's very important. And then you brought up Eric Garner. That brother, I'm going to tell you, if that's illegal, what he was doing, selling loose seeds, loose squares, I've done worse. I'm just telling you, I've done worse. So I'm with you. So this is an opportunity for us to recast education, to recast economics, to recast our own humanity through this intellectual equity movement that we're talking about. And it's got to be there. Everything goes on the table. Nothing goes without questions anymore. And for me, people say, well, Phil, you used to do this. Let me question. Well, question me. And no one in our race at this point is beyond being questioned. And so when you ask what should we do, it absolutely starts at home. Now, it doesn't necessarily start at home with your child and simply only tutoring your child, reading to your child, doing math with your child, sending your child to Ivy League tutoring. Those are important steps. And I subscribe to all that. But it actually starts with a transformation of your spirit, a transformation of your family spirit, a transformation of your community spirit, and a transformation of our spirit as a race of people. Without that transformation, all the simple mechanical things that we might do to try to raise up our children's academic performance, they're not going to mean very much. And so maybe one of our children, and God bless the brother at Ivy League tutoring. I'm not trying to get 1% or to get our children into the 1%. I'm trying to lift up a race of people. Right. And in order to do that, it will take transformation. Right. So that's what, and transformation isn't really a big idea. It's a small idea, but it's an idea that we've got to get a lot of people to buy into.
Okay. Well, that's Phil Jackson, and this is just one component and one lesson in our Building Intellectual Equity course and series. Thank you, Phil Jackson, and I thank all of those who are in this process and working with us. And this is just the beginning. We start from here in the learning process, and we grow and develop. So thank you for tuning in and paying attention.
Thank you, Brother Muhammad. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you.